So yeah, I want to. The next question that I want to ask is like, so we're talking about sort of the benefits of the Lightning Network, um, and obviously if you explain like the sort of the business use case, and how it can assist businesses and people to receive money for work that they're doing, and there's a sort of like barrier to entry. They don't need like a bank account. The processing, the fees are low, etc., etc. What are some of the issues, if there are any? I'm assuming there are, as there are with any kind of technology. What are some of the issues that you think
Mhm.
Lightning has?
I think it's still pretty much at the stage of where it's a developing network. And, like 5 years ago, like 2018, it was really scrappy. And people were saying it was reckless because you could easily lose your funds. That's the stage of where it was. And I think like in 2021, there were more people who were onboarded into Lightning. For example, there was a giant explosion of people who started running their own Lightning nodes, which helped make the network a bit more decentralized. And there are people who are Lightning enthusiasts who want to learn about the technology. There and then now in 2023, the capacity of the network has expanded about 5 times compared to where it was in 2021. So we see this uptrend in growth before payments like might get lost. It couldn't get routed. You couldn't find a path because the network was really well developed. And so, like with any peer to peer network, it's kind of difficult to start. You kind of like to start a peer to peer network is like, okay, well, who am I going to connect with if I'm going to actually start running a node and trying to process payments? It's like the chicken and egg problem. So that I think it's matured a bit. And then there are also like people are concerned about custodial and risk and then non-custodial nodes. It's still difficult to run a non-custodial node, like where you're self-sovereign effectively. A lot of the wallets out there, which are really good, and there's
Hmm.
been a great growth, they're all custodial. So, like Wallet Satoshi is, it's a custodial wallet. But at the same time, I think it's really important for users to be on board with something that's easy to use, even if it is custodial. So, that is one concern that a lot of people have had. But moving forward, there are other wallets which are non-custodial, and we're heading that direction. It's not going to be immediate, but to get people to start to learn how to use it and start accepting it and also transacting is the first step in the right direction. And I think Nostr, which was effectively birthed out of a bunch of Bitcoin and Lightning developers who started it, is one of the biggest online use cases for Lightning right now. I think last I checked, there was about like 100,000 Lightning addresses on Nostr, and we're approaching about 1 to 2 million actual users on the network. So for something that started like only in 2020, that's a huge explosion. And in part, it's because the protocols are simple for people to adopt and simple for people to actually build on as side projects, not even full time necessarily. And it's brought in quite a number of people just this year who have never even heard of Lightning, who never used Bitcoin, and they're like, "Oh, this is interesting. This is a new social decentralized network, and how does this work?" And that in itself is driving adoption and driving more people to come into the space and improve user experience for other wallets. And also, hopefully, it will attract more developers who can help with some of the privacy issues that have been talked about. Because, I mean, Lightning is not entirely private. There's, decent sender privacy, but receiving privacy is not as great. So there's been more innovations on that side, and there's been more innovations on, for example, like being able to send payments to a Lightning address or an LN URL without having to have a server. So people are trying to decouple and eliminate a lot of the centralization risks, for example, of running a server, because not every single user is going to run a server. And I think the good part is that there's more innovation because there's, more people who are coming on board, not just using the network, but attracting more people to actually work on it. So it's still early stages, but I think within the next 2 or 3 years, we'll see it start to mature and become more widely accepted and used. But still very early.
Yeah, you mentioned, the sort of, you mentioned some of the things that Lightning came up against early on. And that kind of reminded me, you were talking about like the peer-to-peer nature of it. And you were saying, this is the kind of thing you expect from peer-to-peer. And I think maybe for people that like aren't familiar with Lightning, maybe or even cryptocurrency, but are familiar with like peer-to-peer protocols, things like BitTorrent. I would imagine what you were saying is very similar to like seeds and peers. So like when there's not enough peers, that's kind of the problem you were saying Lightning was running up against early on. There wasn't enough peers to be able to download the files.
Yeah, it's similar, but it's a little different. I'm sure you discussed Scuttlebutt with G and maybe Hypercore, which is sort of like a BitTorrent protocol. It's it takes time for something to grow, and a lot of people have always asked, why is it taking so long for Lightning? Lightning's never going to take off. But like any peer-to-peer protocol where you have these discovery problems and the challenge of getting more people onto the network is the hardest. But once you've reached like a critical mass, then it starts to take off. And I think that's one of the beauties of Nostr, is because the fact that a lot of the developers originally said, okay, well, we have a problem with social media is obviously too centralized, like Twitter and Facebook. But at the same time, like, how can we engineer this better? And the beauty of Nostr is that, first of all, it's a simple protocol. And it is basically just dumb relays, smart clients, and the user keeps the keys, which is a complete inversion of the model of most social media and big tech. But in addition to that, one of the biggest things about Nostr is that I see a lot of developers coming in who actually just work on side projects, and these side projects actually have impact. So it's like there's very little in terms of overhead in trying to create something that people will use and they're useful, like a blogging platform or a blogging client on Nostr is one of the first things I had in mind as a low-hanging fruit and quick to develop, but also drives adoption. And this is really significant because then people will be also introduced to the Lightning Network in a way because they see other people using it. But at the same time, it's like beating all these other protocols that people have been working on for years for decentralizing social media, that have had lots of venture capital thrown at them. For example, Jack Dorsey's Blue Sky is like a decentralized version of Twitter, but have yet to really truly materialize. Like if you go to Blue Sky, it says, okay, you can sign up for the beta. But I still haven't been able to try the beta out. And yet Nostr, everyone's on it all the time because it's open. So it's really nice to have the open source development just explode because it's open, and you don't have only a few engineers working on something and nobody else is using it.
Unchecked governments have eradicated privacy and truth. Those who resist are brought down swiftly, but we refuse to submit. Unapunks are freedom fighters, protected by encrypted shadows. The future we're building is sovereign and uncensorable. The moonlit night is coming.